Just to put a bit of context, I've worked at BeyondTrust for a couple of years now within the Solutions Engineering Department. Prior to that, had a lot of industry experience working for MSPs, Sophos, IT manager roles. So I've been on the other end of this, thinking about security and bringing third-party vendors within our network and our environments. I think obviously we can all understand with the circumstances of what's happened over the last couple of years, the attack surface has obviously grown quite significantly, and there's a lot of other people now coming in remotely as well. So I've put a bit of agenda together. We talk about sort of my understanding and concepts of what is Zero Trust, especially around the architecture of that. Oh, that's a bit better, I can hear myself now. Things to consider with lots of remote working and how obviously cyber attack risks have increased. How we address that risk, the things we can consider when addressing the risk, and then obviously to look at the BeyondTrust secure remote access solution as well, and some best practice and understanding how Zero architecture can work. So Zero Trust as a principle itself. So my understanding of Zero Trust and how I see it is a bit of a buzzword in the industry at the moment. Zero Trust is a very fashionable term in tech, and I think rightly so as well. For so long, we've had too much trust in everyone and every service that may come in or be part of our network. Zero trust is the idea of removing inherent trust from the network. Just because a device is within the internal trusted side of the firewall or VPN, it should not be trusted by default. Okay? Instead, you should look to build confidence in various transactions occurring. You can do this by developing context through the inspection of a number of signals. These signals are pieces of information like device health or location and give the confidence needed to grant access to a resource. This, in contrast, is much more traditional architecture such as walled garden, also known as VPN-based remote access architecture. This traditional approach attempts to establish that all-important trust relationship at the point where devices connect to the network. So when that VPN is connected, that's when we start gaining the trust of that device and or user. A key phrase when talking about Zero Trust is never trust and always verify. In a walled garden architecture, once you authenticate into the network, you have access to all the services that reside there. Zero Trust builds on this by always verifying access requests to services and using a number of signals to build context. Obviously, those signals can be things like reporting, again, coming back to location, where people come, and we can offload that information. Obviously, some key other components within that as well. Zero Trust is a concept, obviously is around validating and authenticating, and then Zero Trust itself on an architectural-based perspective is planning out and applying those concepts into our networking and our landscape within our network and outside of that. So why Zero Trust? Why now? Assets, users and devices are no longer confined to the physical structure behind a secured perimeter, so they're not inside anymore, but instead scattered in a new cloud-based universe. You can no longer rely on typical network controls for security. Digital transformation, including cloud and workforce mobility, has vastly expanded the attack surface. The Zero Trust model brings a lot of focus to potential that something or someone within inside the network perimeter has been compromised, under the assumption that every user, request and server is untrusted until proven otherwise. A Zero Trust solution dynamically and continually assesses trust every time a user or device requests access to a resource. This approach prevents attackers from exploiting weakness in the perimeter to gain entry, and once inside, move laterally across to access confidential applications and data. In the traditional moat and castle model, attackers had an easy way of finding themselves inside the network and stealing credentials, finding those unprotected systems. And once inside, very largely freely roam our networks. Okay? Once that VPN is connected, unless we're locking down specific services or VLANing off all of our technologies, they are allowed to go site-wide. On the other side of that, when we move to the zero trust sort of perimeterless model, we always assume breach. We have to assume the worst. And once we get in that mindset of assuming the worst, we can then get to that stage where we're putting in the right systems in place in order to help mitigate any risk around the breach that may have happened. Gradually, the attacks that led to the breach of data at different companies worldwide showed how negative such a situation can be. There's financial loss, work stoppage, image damage, and more, and I'm sure we all know of a few of those that have been in the news in the last couple of years. Two factors are driving the adoption of zero trust security model. The BYOD, which is bring your own device, the practice that allows the use of personal electronic devices such as notebooks, tablets, and smartphones for work and access to the corporate network, as well as the home office or remote work, a situation that makes access to the corporate network through a home network a need, which makes it more vulnerable to a cyber risk. We sent everyone home. That's just what we did during COVID. It is not without reason that information security has gained greater prominence since remote work has become a more common reality everywhere. So I've broken this down to some key areas of risk and just some takeaways and things to think about as part of the presentation as well. Remote access is the number one attack vector, that's for sure, whether that be your internal users or whether that be vendors that you're allowing in. Unmanaged credentials are a massive risk. Shadow IT, obviously people finding their own tools in order to work. And then an inability to achieve compliance. Sometimes we break the bounds in order to achieve the compliance that we need to and the mandates that are set upon us. So I'm just going to break these down a bit further for us. Due to the widening of the attack surface, rapid growth of accounts and their privileges, we have taken the stance that don't trust any device that is trying to access any part of your internal network. Whether that be an endpoint or a service it's accessing. This is not exclusive to the remote network, as the internal network can also be compromised, but threat actors historically and will always continue to find easier to access unsecured remote access paths into your network. This is because most organisations simply do not know all of the remote access pathways that are being used by their employees and their vendors. This can be further highlighted due to the different teams and external vendors often using their own unsecured or free remote access tools. Communication over a network to access data or services should be a secure transport such as TLS. The device should be configured to prevent attacks that are coming into your network. This includes DNS spoofing, man-in-the-middle attacks, and unsolicited inbound connections. Unmanaged credentials, and very relevant for us at BeyondTrust. You should build your systems to have strong authentication methods and build applications to accept access decisions from a policy engine or role-based access control. MFA is required for a zero trust architecture. It is a required necessity. But let's consider taking this one step further to just-in-time managed credential stance, giving access to the right credential at the right time. Continuous evaluation is supported by monitoring signals from users and devices and evaluating them continually. If confidence in their security degrades, re-authentication may be triggered dynamically before authorization, continued access to services and data is allowed. Regardless of how you design your zero trust architecture, the policy engine or any component that enforces policy should only allow connections if the strict policies you define are satisfied. A big tick in the box has to be done before they're allowed any further. The new world of hybrid working is not only our vendors connecting with a remote session that may require credentials to access and operate resources, to administrative, root or power users, but also our own employees. As much as we don't want to admit it, these elevated privileged credentials may be potentially exposed and out of control. I'm sure we've all walked past a desk when we worked in the office, with a username and password on a post-it note or a note on the desk. An office is controllable with something like a tidy desk policy. But how can we control that when our vendors are not there and our remote employees aren't there anymore either? We certainly can't control who comes into their house and who can view things on their desks. And that risk is then multiplied by the amount of home workers we have and the amount of vendors we're now asking to come into our networks. It doesn't matter if it's a BYOD approach, vendors unmanaged endpoints, if credentials are being entered remotely, they are exposed to the local computer and any malware or attack like man in the middle that can sniff out the credential that's being used. Many IT organizations use privileged accounts so that administrators and applications have access and the access they need to do their jobs. However, this is a high-risk approach. Privileged accounts can be difficult to find and the volume of credentials can be hard to keep track of and probably more excessive access than needed. This challenge only increases with the number of platforms that have privileged accounts to be managed. And as the organizations increase their usage of cloud, IoT and DevOps tools. Infrequently rotated credentials, such as those embedded and hard-coded in applications or databases, are prone to misuse. I'm sure we've all sat here before and got a credential that is many, many years old and hasn't been managed as correctly as that. Visibility into privileged account usage can be challenging, not just because of the monitoring of accounts, but how that correlates with the larger issue of user behavior. And there's just complexity in organizations. We have many different arms to our business across many different locations. That always adds a layer of complexity. If managed improperly, these credentials present significant security and compliance risks from the intentional, accidental, or direct misuse. In fact, privileged accounts are a prime target for cyber attackers, used in 80% of data breaches. How can security teams balance the need to protect accounts used to access the organization's critical data while enabling administrators to be productive as well? Shadow IT, one of those things we always moan at as well. It's important that strong authentication doesn't hinder the usability of a service. If employees are not provided with proper tools by the IT team, they will find new ones themselves. We all know these free tools exist and have or continue to use them today. The lack of monitoring, authentication and security modelling necessary to protect against an incident is the major problem with those tools. When choosing the components of a Zero Trust architecture, you should prefer services with built-in support for Zero Trust, as you could be facing a plethora, lots of, remote access solutions and a mountain of problems that are simply unmanageable for you and your teams. Creating your own supporting infrastructure should be avoided due to the cost, complexity and potential for error. In this case, as elsewhere, the general cybersecurity principles of using products and services that have been designed and built by trained professionals still holds true in whatever we are looking at from a security perspective. Compliance. Those guys always knocking on our door. In my past career, every time I got anywhere near a change to a system, I had to say to myself, compliance. Don't all sign at once, by the way. I heard a laughter, that's the main thing. In a Zero Trust architecture, it is highly likely that your monitoring strategy will change to focus on users, devices and services. Monitoring your devices, services and user behaviour will help you establish their cyber health. Collecting, managing and analysing audit logs of events that could help detect, understand or recover from a cyber attack is also a common requirement from a Zero Trust perspective. You should know what actions devices, users and services are performing and what data they are accessing. Your monitoring should link back to the policies that you have set. Well, we spoke about policies a couple of slides ago. They should link back to that, verifying that they are being enforced as you expect. Compliance mandates such as PCI, GDPR, HIPAA and many others require the management and control of access and credential use. These compliance mandates are across all industries and are continuously evolving and introducing new requirements to ensure that sensitive data is protected by the organisation. If you are unsure, try to stay focused on compliance requirements is critical, as failure to meet them can not only result in hefty fines, but also compromise your security. So how do we address some of those risks and the identified risks that we put in? So they're the 4 problems we had on our screens: remote access and attack vector, unmanaged credentials, shadow IT and those tools that we are using, or inability to achieve compliance. Solution for that: replace all or nothing access with granular levels of permission, that role-based access control. Should I have access to something? Why should I have access to it again? Re-authenticate all of the time. Unmanaged credentials. Store and manage all credentials in a vault integrated into a remote access solution. When someone is coming in, don't just give them passwords that are unmanaged. Allow them to be managed in a vault and then rotated every single time their usage or over a time-bound period as well. Big tick in that one. Consolidate to a single solution. There are too many tools out there for your staff and your vendors to be coming into. Consolidate those down to make it easier to manage, and then the other things above happen as well. Big tick on that. And finally, to ability to achieve compliance, enable features that meet the compliance requirements set out in the mandates that you're trying to achieve. Whether that be things like auditing, session recording and monitoring, or even logs that are being sent back to an external scene-based system. Whatever they are, enable those features as part of your system. Big tick that. Let someone take a screenshot of that one. So, secure remote access. Obviously, I'd be silly to come up here and not talk about a solution that may be in the offering from that perspective and who I am at BeyondTrust. So for those who aren't aware of BeyondTrust, and we have a stand that is just outside the door there, BeyondTrust is a range of solutions to deal with PAM or privileged access management, and included in that is the product called Secure Remote Access, or part of that is our PRA product, which is Privileged Remote Access. It looks at and allows you to securely bring in your vendors or remote staff, allowing to hit all the compliance mandates by session recording, vaulted credentials and rotation, as well as outbound connectivity, so there's no firewalls to open. And I'll go over some of the architecture and how that ticks the box from a Zero Trust perspective. Just to quickly talk about any of the other products in here, which is key integrations between all of them as well. Privileged password management is probably what you guys are aware of from a PAM-based solution. That's your classic vaulting. The ability to put credentials in there and for them to be managed and rotated, whatever the credential type may be, and the ability to manage those via things like APIs as well. Endpoint privilege management is that least privileged approach to the endpoints, whether that endpoint be something like a Windows and taking admin rights away from your end users. Servers, whether that be from your administrators coming in, them not having elevated rights. Things like root accounts on Linux. Instead of taking that approach of the user is now trusted, effectively we're elevating the application which the user needs to, in order to do their job, by a tokenized method, instead of just giving them a time-bound administrative credential. And finally, a new product in the market we bought is Cloud Privilege Protection. Again, in a multi-cloud universe, and we are all consuming cloud in different, through different providers. That gives us a higher level view of how risk scores go against the privileged accounts that may exist within the different cloud and multi-cloud systems that we may have. So we're going to talk about secure remote access, and secure remote access as a definition is securing, managing and auditing remote privileged access, whether that be vendors or admins, as well as the service desk and those guys as well. We enable the vendor to connect into our system securely. As I said before, this is done by an architecture that is an outbound connectivity over port 443 only, never opening firewall rules in order to get to the endpoint and just to the endpoints that they need to. We can deploy flexibility of that. We can protect the privileged credentials, whether the session be in SaaS, whether that be on premises and you want to take that architecture, whatever it may be. We have flexibility in the deployment methods that we have. And we help you achieve compliance from that. Safeguarding sensitive data. We can have full audit trails, including forensics, when it comes to any command strokes or logging that happens within a session as well. So let's look about the architecture and how that helps with the Zero Trust approach to that. So this could be a typical BeyondTrust setup, and I'm broken this down into just to help us understand and build this out a little bit further as we go through the next couple of slides. Effectively, in the local area network, there are the endpoints that we need to connect to, whether those endpoints be anything from an RDP connection, even to a web-based service or an application, to Linux as well. The architecture itself may be stored, and I've got it in this example, in a SaaS-based, cloud-based solution. This can also be within the network perimeter or outskirts of network perimeter via a DMZ, but effectively the arrow coming from the local outbound connection is the really key important thing here. The users coming from the top, from the World Wide Web, wherever they are, we now no longer have to make sure that they're coming from the locations that we say they are. We can securely authenticate them via port 443. They gain access to a session which effectively is an outbound heartbeat coming from the endpoint or connectivity within that to display the session securely within the appliance. Everything that is happening on the user's session is being fully audited, managed, recorded for you, and then you can take that away, give that to your compliance and audit people if needed as well. They don't have to gain access to all those endpoints. Again, through things like role-based access control, we can granularly define the endpoints and or services they can gain access to when the session happens, and that can all happen through a web-based portal. So no additional tools to manage for your vendors to come in. So building that a bit further, again, a web-based HTML5 application, no Java involved in that from a security-based perspective, or even coming from things like Android and iOS devices, we have to be on the move. We're all here today. Everyone can pretend they're not working, but I really know you are. If you need to administer a system and get in, how do you get in securely without spinning up that VPN or allowing connectivity? What is over a public network we're gaining access to at this hotel today? Even where we have endpoint, we can install an application onto those endpoints as well to allow a one-to-one connective and a feature-rich experience to the end user, where again we can lock down based upon a set of rules that we apply. If we want to give them access just to a command prompt in a session, so be it. A full GUI session, so be it. If we then want to utilize the connection protocols that we already have and have been utilizing for years, whether that RDP, and we don't want to deploy an agent onto the endpoint because we can't deploy an agent onto all endpoints, we know that. Networking equipment, things like that need SSH sessions. How do we gain secure access to those as well? That's when we drop in things like we have we call it a jump point, which is like a connection broker into that segment of a network. That then proxies the connection onward to the connectivity method or connectivity protocol in order to allow all session recording and data to go back via securely to that proxy agent and then back out into the cloud as well. It never breaks that connection. This is all happening over TLS 1.3, 443 outbound connectivity and that as well. Okay. And a final slide, because I'm more than the way I'm running out of time. Again, if we think about the authentication, we have built authentication into an appliance as well, but why not utilize, and we say this from a Zero Trust perspective as well, why not utilize those Active Directory servers, Azure, whatever it may be, in order to make sure we're not doubling the efforts of keeping user accounts secure and making sure they're part of the group policies, and then role-based access control can take place based upon the groups that they're in and however that may work. So we're really closing up the ability for any attack vector to come in any other way, because we are sure the users that are coming in have been authenticated, multi-factor authentication that may happen, and then are gaining access to the endpoints they should be gaining access to securely via the connection methods. Just to finish up before I go to any questions, balancing security and productivity is really, really difficult, and we always have to understand, and it is that balancing act that happens between an underlocked person who has full access anywhere and an overlocked person who then can't do their job. Okay, we have to make sure, and we want people in the middle of that. With thinking about this from a Zero Trust perspective can be really difficult, but there are lots of tools out there which can help you get to that stance in order to make sure that you have locked down the perimeter coming into your network securely. I want to thank you very much, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any for the last 5 minutes. Otherwise, please come and see us at the stand. That's great. Thank you very much, everyone.